big welcome to both Crystal Hartman and Keenan Dailey, who are here today. This is our third artist talk for the summer for our Around the Block artists from our virtual neighborhood exhibit. And I'm Lisa Costello, and I'm the gallery director here at Parkland College for Gertz Gallery. And everything for the exhibit is pretty much on our website, including our virtual exhibition and the price list, catalog, and the recording for our first gallery talk by Joe Birdwell and Victoria Ford. And we also just posted our second gallery talk, which is Sarah Marianovic and Catherine Weisner. So if you are new to us or you weren't able to make it, please check those out on our website. And in case you haven't heard, we're preparing to open this fall. We will be kicking off the fall season with our art and design faculty exhibition, and that exhibit will open on Monday, August 23rd. The reception will be on Thursday, September 2nd from 5:30 to 7:30. And Chris Birdie is our featured artist. At this time, I don't believe he's going to be speaking at the reception. I think we're going to have that at a separate time, but I'm still working on that. So you'll need to kind of check back with us, especially with the pandemic guidelines. So it should be a really terrific talk with Chris. And I know he's produced a lot of artwork this summer for the show. I'd also like to thank, getting back to the Around the Block exhibit, I'd like to thank all of the artists for exhibiting their work in the show and thank everyone in the community for their wonderful support. I don't want to forget to thank our Gallery Advisory Board and the Parkland College Administration, as well as Donna and Fred Gertz. And of course, I want to thank Cindy Smith, who is our tech support for today. She's kind of our Facebook guru. So if you're seeing us on Facebook, hello out there. And I also wanted to acknowledge the Illinois Arts Council for the support that we receive through grant funding for public programming such as this. If you enjoy this event, I hope you'll tune in to our upcoming virtual talk with the juror. She'll be speaking next Wednesday, August 4th at 6 p.m., also on Zoom. Her name is Camille Wilson White, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her speak. She is very active in advocacy for the arts and is the executive director at the Oak Park Area Arts Center. So we'll be back here on Zoom, same time, same place, just a different link. And so you'll need to register to attend it, and unless you're seeing it on Facebook. And I encourage you to sign up for our email blast to hear about our upcoming events. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Keenan Dailey. Keenan is a multidisciplinary Afrofuturist artist and designer, focusing on disenfranchised and marginalized communities. He uses empathic systems of thinking and forges harmonious design solutions with his work. By using his artistic voice in conjunction with his design efforts, he shares a catharsis with those populations who ordinarily wouldn't have the opportunity to express trauma. So I've really been looking forward to hearing him talk. And it's just so wonderful that we have so many talented artists in this community. And I just keep learning about more and more artists. So I know that Keenan was the Student ACE Award winner through 40 North a few years ago. And so I was familiar with him, but not really as much with his work. So I'm really looking forward to hearing him talk. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Keenan.
Thank you, Lisa, for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm super grateful to have been in this exhibit. It's awesome. It's awesome. This is wonderful. What I want to do is kind of share a PowerPoint of just my different pieces and just show a little bit of how I got to the pieces that are featured in this exhibit. So let's see. Let me get into present mode here. So me, what is it? I graduated from the University of Illinois. I got my MFA there in graphic design literally this spring, but I've been very active in terms of working just with the arts programs in the Champaign community in Champaign County and Urbana as well. It's really, more so them taking me in them taking me in and being like just wonderful support and guidance for me in my artistic career, like in terms of just growing through my academic career and then like now trying to pursue art. This has been a wonderful area and I'm very happy to be featured in this gallery. So let's see. So me, I am an Afrofuturist artist. So, you know, you'll hear many different definitions of Afrofuturism, but if you really want to think of Afrofuturism, you can kind of think of Black Panther. That's probably the biggest, you know, what is it, mainstream interpretation of Afrofuturism that we have that'll be like, oh, okay, I know exactly what you're thinking about. How I personally coin Afrofuturism is any representation of the future by a Black person, and a Black person being anyone in the Afro diaspora. So that's how I represent Afrofuturism. It's just, you know, okay, any future that is laid out, whether it be through writing, whether it be through music, whether it be through video, whether it be through documentary, any future that is laid out and documented, that's Afrofuturism. So that's where I like to situate my work. And let's show a couple pieces. So these are pieces that I kind of made in that interim period of shifting from undergrad to grad school. And I was very heavily deep into illustration. I still love illustration, but I was definitely heavily deep into vector illustration and vector art and really just making different vector works. So I love just making these different pieces. A lot of these pieces were made for, the Black and Latino Male Summit that happens on the UIUC campus. So that was what these pieces were for. And during these pieces, I really was able to find my leaning within Afrofuturism. I started to find the lens of like, okay, well, I want to take something that is generally maligned in the media, which is the hood or the ghetto. I want to take something that is generally maligned and like put on the entire, ethnicity and culture of Black people and deify it. I want to take this deification angle. I want this to be looked at as this mythical, beautiful, higher power space. That's what I want it to be representative of. So you'll see like a lot of, Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo type of elements in my paintings, type of compositions that are like, you have doves and like halos and different things like that. And just smoke like coming out. So that was where that was when I kind of first dove into like my identity as an Afrofuturist. That's where that started. So at the top right corner, what I put is where the location is, because some of these pieces are up. So these three pieces, I think they are still in the Bruce Nesbitt African American Culture Center on campus. And you'll be, if somebody wants to go out there and find them. They're also like on my different sites, but like I don't have a lot of time to list my sites. But also at the bottom left-hand corner, like I've also put my Patreon, because that's where I gather a lot of support from the community, and people have been super helpful in terms of like literally allowing me to do what it is that I love. So let's keep going. I really like this piece. This was a mural that I got to do for the School of Social Work lobby. And this is such a powerful piece for me. This is a super, as I'm trying to describe it, it's just a super strong piece for me, because I was able to give Blackness to a space that traditionally and historically would not have it, such as being like in the Illinois campus, which is a predominantly white institution. That was such a powerful moment for me. And we were able to then create a mural series out of this that would then serve to represent many different kind of cultural voices like across like the spectrum. So this is a piece that I'm super proud of and I'm super grateful for. This is one that is in School of Social Work lobby. But this like also starts to get me thinking more about disenfranchised and marginalized communities. So a quick detour. I wanted to, like, this is kind of like last year. So we're getting closer to like the gallery. Kind of last year, I made this 3D series. So this is when I started to make more 3D stuff. As you see, the gallery work is 3D. And I started with this puff series. And I really wanted to capture kind of like innocence as well as serenity. And I wanted to capture a peace. I wanted to start looking for a hopeful future. So I made these little bees that go on adventures, and it's super cool because it's kind of like a total like shift from my normal, super stoic or like serious representations of art. And I just wanted to play around with these bees and get a super intense version of innocence and serenity, and then juxtapose it. So I love playing with the idea of like something super fun, super bouncy and sweet, but also has something very intensely heavy to say or intensely heavy to communicate, whether it comes through fantasy representations or heavy theoretical and metaphysical representations of things. So that's where this Puff series, as I like to call it, went. And I'm really happy with that. There's a URL for the book. And like I just turned it into like a very small like illustration book. And I'm really happy with how that, turned out. Like I'm trying to watch my time because there's a decent amount to get through. But let's see. Okay, so this is, we're getting like right up to the edge of what I made for the gallery. And this is 1104. This was my thesis work. So this is my thesis work for my MFA that I recently completed. And what is it? 1104 was a movie concept that I wanted to produce because I love film. I love the film community in Champaign and Urbana. They've taken me in my weird like idea of like, oh, like this is how you do it. This is how you make a script. They're like, no, that's not it, but we'll help you. So, they've really like guided me in terms of like understanding film. And I wanted to pursue that even further and kind of create an animated feature. So like during my thesis, I was just building the concept and building out the script and building out the score and just thinking musically as well as tonally, like how certain themes interact. And then towards the end, I started to create. I started to make, like after so much time of just like being patient with myself to say like, all right, let's just relax. Let's just think, and let's just think like very heavily conceptually. Let's just get everything that I would want to say out. So this kind of ended up being like how do I describe it? It kind of just began to become a metaphysical adventure. And I say metaphysical adventure, what I mean is, the way in which we don't all speak the same language, we don't all have the same verbiage, we don't all use the same words, but we can all feel each other's intentions. We can all recognize intentions. We can all recognize positive and benevolent intentions. We can recognize malevolent and mean intentions if somebody's meaning to be mean to you. And I wanted to explore those different like realms and those weird virtual realms where we connect with each other, but we don't see it, and try to really get a representation of something that can be more than just the words, more than just the visual on the screen, something that can be like really shaking to the core. And that is what this movie is for me. Like I just like to say, like, to simplify it, Black Panther meets the Matrix. So that's like what this is for me. And like, I'm so grateful, like, as I continued like my 3D journey, I was able to get more specific in how I rendered, more specific in how I designed characters, more specific in how like I created things. And I was finally able to build a 3D animation pipeline for facial animation. So this was, I'm gonna talk over him, which is me, but like this is, the first attempt that I had at facial animation is following, this 1104, this kind of journey into virtual reality, this kind of journey into metaphysics, and trying to like, let's say, like kind of trying to mount it into a production, mount it into something real and visual. So this leads me to like where I am kind of now, which is the Hyperdark. The Hyperdark is super fun for me, and this is like where my work kind of resides now. It's a mix between hyperrealism and surrealism for me with a darker tonality. And that's where some of my work resides now. I'm kind of noticing and I'm kind of building that. It's an Afrofuturist hyper dark. And I feel as though it really allows for me to connect with, you know, the virtual realities, the experiences that marginalized and disenfranchised communities will go through in terms of their own trauma, even in terms of transgenerational trauma, and trying to represent those in a very like visual and sometimes visceral way. Has been like a very wonderful like direction for me, and it's something that I want to continue to push as I like kind of lead people into it. Like, you know, my goal is to kind of be a medium of like, I'm not going to hit you with straight up horror, but I want to be able to walk you through some of the experiences that might be out there so that you can be comfortable knowing how these different like realities that people live in, like in their own like, you know, virtual like existence, how they operate. You know, like you can be comfortable with things that are heavier, represented. Everything doesn't have to be in the standard traditional way of beauty for someone to be comfortable. So that's where, let's see, we kind of get this. And this is a piece called, what is it? Black Love in a White Obscurity. And it just tackles, you know, different interpretations of, what is it, Black relationships in terms of like a Eurocentric society. So this is like where my art started to go in terms of like 3D representation. And then we get here. We get to these pieces that are featured in the gallery, and I'm really happy about both of these. This one was, what is it? Like, I wanted to like focus on like a little bit of serenity, but also play with the aspect of time. I was kind of playing with the aspect of time and space because it was supposed to be a representation of kind of nature from our perspective during the virus. So nature from our perspective during the virus, time is kind of moving slow. You see the water pouring and it's like super slow, but that's not how water pours, but the koi fish are moving super fast. It's kind of like nature is healing out of our own time. So that's kind of where I was going with that. And this other one here is, what is it? It's titled The Old Gods. And it's also like going into that deification area that like I was experimenting with earlier, but also takes more of that hyper dark feel and starts to push it in a little bit more in terms of this representational media pushback. So yeah, that was a lot, but those are my pieces. And that's kind of a lot about me in hopefully a short enough amount of time. So thank you.
Yeah, that was great timing. And so much. I've taken a whole page of notes. So my notebook is here, and I'm going to refer to them and ask a few questions if you don't mind.
Oh, I'm for it.
Yeah. So a few things that I was curious about, since you mentioned art history and the idea of like, I don't know, you know, maybe more famous European paintings. And then you also mentioned really contemporary things like Black Panther, as well as, what was the other movie that you mentioned?
The Matrix.
Matrix, thank you. What are some of the processes maybe that you go through when you're thinking about, you know, this art history that was created so long ago and then this really contemporary work? I mean, a lot of the people that made the contemporary work, you know, are still alive, and not all of them, but you know, and so you're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants in a way that are still alive, where it's different if you're doing that with an old master or something like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, how do you just kind of pull these things that you really grab onto, that you respond to, or do you sometimes find things and then say, no, I'm going to push that away? How do you kind of, I guess, I don't know, coordinate all of those interests, and, you know, what do you reject and what do you bring in? You know what I mean? Because there are other great movies out there that I could see you being inspired by. So maybe it was just the shortness of the talk, but I'm kind of curious how you get your inspirations. Is it from your art history classes that you were in, or visiting places, things like that, seeing the different movies?
Like I kind of like what I love is the messiness of kind of what is it? Let me see. Let me get the words first. I don't want to stumble over my words. Let me get the words first.
Sure.
I love the messiness of stimuli. That's the best way to put it. I love the messiness of stimuli. Like there's so much that I've taken in and so much that I've been able to relate to others with that I love just letting it chaotically just fall out and let it become like a representation of whatever it may be. And I love to juxtapose that with my own like self-reflection and ontology. That's something that really like sparks me because I've seen that, I'll try like what I've learned earlier I guess in my artistic career, like, is that I can try very hard to think very representationally and be very, very deliberate in like certain works and try to get an outcome and it'll just it'll just not, they're like, oh no, we're over here. I'm like, what? So I've learned that for me, the greatest thing that I can do for myself in my artwork is to be fully introspective and let it be a place of, I guess, a place of meditation, a place of like allowing somebody to walk through your mind to where they might get other insights. And I like it at this point where I'm at, I like it to be really messy in that space and just say like, we've all been flooded with stimuli our whole lives. Let's let this process be very messy.
I sometimes think, and you sound exactly like what I think sometimes is a lot with artists, you're collecting all of this information and then it goes into your brain. Your brain's like a big water tower or something. And you start to slowly distill it, whether it's your personal experiences or things that you've been exposed to, your background, all of those things kind of come together and respond in a way that, you're creating something original. And that's what I kind of feel like with your work too, when you started talking about your, references and things like that. So it's pretty exciting, where you're at right now with, collecting all of these things and kind of hyper stimulated, and sorting those out or distilling them. I think distilling for me is a really good word. So yeah, that's terrific. And, it's interesting when people are inspired by, contemporary work and then kind of going back and looking back through history. So having said that, I also think about your background with graphic design and, working in a whole new, if you think about even photography is considered a new field and you're doing something even more recent than video. It's pretty wild, that you're doing the 3D work. And, I think your piece is what is it? An NFT? Is that right? I looked that up. So I wasn't quite sure. I've heard about it, but I wasn't really sure.
Non-fungible token.
And so you're kind of taking in all this newer technology and, we think about technology as a tool. You're even talking about creating film and having to learn all of those processes, through filmmaking, which is, considered old, with considering some of the things that you're working with. So I guess, how does that affect you when you start looking at those other works that were kind of created prior to all of these tools that you're using now? And how do you kind of assimilate that into your work or, kind of create your own work from all of that? I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but I guess I'm thinking about, you're really forging new territory in a way, particularly. Yeah. So is that scary to you or maybe you haven't thought about it that way?
You know what? I think about, when I think about like the old masters, I kind of think about the times. I think about how much slower certain processes would be, right? Certain pieces I can make very quickly. But then then I ask myself, I guess, what becomes of the conceptualization at that point?
Yeah.
If I'm not spending all of my time rendering this figure, and I'm not spending all of my time just sitting here painting and rendering in a very like slow process, that like, you know, every brushstroke can be a representation of my like energy. Like I can literally infuse that into every brushstroke. How do I represent that in a different time scale? And how do I take that and speed it up? And what type of artifacts get pulled from that sped up process? So that's why, like, you know, I end up going back to the messiness, because I'm like, like with all this, like, especially even like being a digital artist, like, you know, a piece that would take 32 hours would take months or years at
Yeah.
that time. So it's like, you know,
Yeah, you have to
like,
make your own paints and
right. I'm like, oh, I just go to my color picker and it's right there. So, you know, like they're like, I feel as though I really try my best to receive like the, you know, what is it? I guess the intentions laid in the paintings of the old masters, and like take those intentions when I like receive them and when I come across them, and take those and kind of infuse them in this different time scale and let them like spread out as if it's like a graph of like different ways in which that stimuli has affected me, and then I'm processing out. So,
oh
yeah.
wow. Okay, that's great. Um, I had another question for you. I was thinking about our students and what they would like to talk about with you. Um, and I thought about you talked about, your illustration. And what are some of your favorite illustrators?
Oh my goodness.
Put that on the spot.
Some of my favorite illustrators, off the top of my head, Taj Francis comes to mind.
Okay.
Taj Francis is an amazing, I think he's Jamaican. He's an amazing like illustrator. He is ridiculous. There's Taj Francis, and then I also think about, so like I go between like illustration and painting. So when I think about painters, I think about Kehinde Wiley.
Oh yeah.
Of course, yeah, for sure. I think about comics a lot, and I think about Alex Ross as a painter, for sure. Who else do I think about? I have a lot of influences. Oh, Joshua Mays is an amazing muralist painter who does like a lot of Afrofuturist murals.
And how did you spell his last name? Maize?
No, it's just Mays.
Oh, M-A-Y.
I think it's just Mays. Yes.
Okay. Great.
Mm-hmm. Joshua Mays, he's an amazing. Ken Taylor actually would be when you see Ken Taylor's work, you'll kind of see a very direct inspiration for some of my earlier works. He is a vector illustrator that is incredible. He's amazing.
Great.
Yeah. So in terms of my illustration, those are my guys. Oh, another painter, and this is my last one because I get excited, is Harmonia Rosales. Harmonia Rosales, she definitely like goes with the high juxtaposition of like old masters deification paintings and like, commissions from like the Catholic Church, and like juxtaposes them with Black women, and it's amazing. So yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And then finally, and we'll get on to our the next artist. You had mentioned the idea of site-specific work and how rewarding that was, like in the School of Social Work.
Yes.
That's so completely different, I think, than graphic design. Like if you're designing something for, a book cover or something like that, how is that different for you, or are they somehow similar? I guess.
You know what? This was the cornerstone of that. That piece that I showed, the School of Social Work piece, was literally the cornerstone of that, because I was commissioned to do that piece. And I was caught between my graphic design mind and my artist mind, like my pure artist mind. So that was the time before that. How I kind of navigated that, though, was when I finished this piece, like there was an older Black person on the committee, and they saw the piece and they broke down crying, because it was beautiful to have this space, to have this energy put in this space. And I had recognized that, and that was a complete shift for me. I was like, oh, okay, I'm seeing something that I need to follow up on. I'm seeing something that I need to follow up on, and I need to chase down. I need to chase down this feeling of saying like, okay, well, how do I take something that can be corporate branding representational and instead go a direction of, you know, metaphysical empathy that I can't even put a firm tab on and say, this is exactly what I'm doing, but I know how it affects people.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a wonderful connection. Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Lisa, we have a question that came up. It's in the chat.
It's in the chat? Okay, let me ask that. A Facebook question. Do some concepts work better for you in 2D versus 3D? That's a great question.
Some concepts work better in 2D versus 3D. No, not really. Not really, because I don't always think so much about, I guess not anymore. I don't think about the representation. There was a while when I used to think more about the representation, but now it's moved to a very conceptual, like, you know, how do I render the hyperdark? How do I render this hyper real, surreal, dark tonality? How do I render that? So it's not, sometimes there can be an inclination towards 2D or 3D, but I wouldn't necessarily say that there's so much of a, I know that this will work better in this space or this space. It's more about the story and the intention, first and foremost. So that's kind of how I go about it, for sure.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm really looking forward to seeing more of your hyperdark work as it evolves. So I will, now that we're Facebook friends, I will start following you for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So Crystal Hartman is going to speak next, and she's a multimedia artist, and she's influenced by extended time that she spent in Indonesia as a child. She was influenced by her experience there and created this work called White Chocolate. It is based on Indonesian puppetry, and that inspires her work. So this offers just a tiny glimpse into that space. So I'm going to actually get that started now. So your pieces, in some ways, at first when I was kind of booking both of you together, I was like, the only thing that really connects you is, is the video component. So moving artwork. But then the more I thought about it, I really thought about how, and we talked a little bit about some of it today, but in a way you're taking something that's traditional or historic and then kind of making it your own. What was the impetus for making this piece? I know historically you're a jeweler, is that correct? So I don't know how much video you've made or how many puppet shows you've done, but what inspired you to make this piece?
So in my work, I am constantly dealing with concepts of place and identity and largely the environment. I actually started doing lots of painting and drawing and then studied printmaking and specifically intaglio etching. So really, really slow processes. And after that, I kind of moved into video and started making films that were more moving images for me. So I like this idea of a painting or, an image that comes to life. And I'm really interested in rawness. So I really like things that are straight from the initial film or straight from the initial video and not editing them too much, but letting kind of those flaws show through. I'm not sure if you noticed, but in this piece, there are these times when the puppeteer's finger pops up and you can see the puppeteer moving the monkey's arm, or you can actually see like my hair come through the bottom corner at one point. And I was talking with Lisa earlier today and saying, we went through this process, and like all of the work that I do, be it painting or illustration or jewelry design, I have a tendency towards very, very slow processes. This video, I don't even know how many times we shot it. So many times. The final video that I ended up choosing to go with, we had gone to the Cranert and we saw some amazing music and just got super inspired and came home. And I think we were up until like 3 or 4 in the morning filming this over and over and over again. I just loved it. And I just loved like each little thing that would happen that would be different or strange or a little almost like a glitch, but it was actually just a hand or something that showed the humanity in it and like the actual maker's hand in a video. And I kind of thought that gave it this like authenticity and this approachable nature that is kind of like what this story is really about for me. So to kind of give you a background on the actual story, when I was a kid, our parents suddenly, my parents are jewelers and artists, and they worked so hard for their whole lives. And suddenly they one day my dad sawed down the sign at his store and was like, we're making a change. And there was like a period of time where I don't know what he was doing. He was thinking and figuring out what he wanted to do. And next thing you know, they took us to Indonesia, and it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I was young and impressionable, and everything was different, and everything, the smells and the sounds. And I remember the funeral processions coming through and just the way that the gamelan and the people talking and all of the sounds would kind of just like float through the town, and you could hear them, and it didn't just sound like music, but it sounded, like life, and but it was about death. And I loved that. And it left such a strong impression on me, the way that this culture didn't just sweep things under the rug, but would like honor them, and it would have such beauty to it. It like really, really moved me. And we were specifically in Ubud in Bali, Indonesia. And Ubud is kind of the center place of craft and art and cultural craft in Indonesia. So everyone is an artist and a maker, and everywhere you go, you're just seeing people making these incredible puppets and sculptures and baskets and fabrics and colors, just all these beautiful natural dyes being made. And to see that at a young time left a huge impression on me. So when I started working on this specific piece, I was working with the idea of place. And after sitting with this concept of place in the context of having just moved across the country, I'm from Colorado, and I just moved to Champaign-Urbana, and I felt so out of place. And so I started just like thinking deeply about that. And what popped up were a handful of different memories. And I became very interested in this idea of what it is that really attaches in our minds. You know, what is it? Is it the smell or the sound, or, you know, what are these things that kind of get to us? And this specific story happened one day. So I was a kid, and I suddenly was like missing home so much. And I asked a friend who was cooking for us and teaching me Indonesian and just teaching me everything. Basically, I asked her if she could make me chocolate milk, and she disappeared. And she came back, and she had this glass of what appeared to be milk. And I was like, okay. And I took a drink of it, and then ended up asking her, and came to discover that she had melted down a white chocolate bar and whipped it into the milk. And it was the most amazing thing I had ever tasted. And I was amazed by what she had done. You know, it wasn't like some instant chocolate milk or something. It was like this thoughtful, beautiful thing that could only have had there. And I drank all of it. And then we left for the day. And we were gone for hours and hours. And we came back. And as we're walking up to the little bungalow we were living in, the whole patio, like all the ground and the whole patio, and all the way up the chairs, and all the way up the legs of the table, and across the table, and onto that glass that I had left there, was black, just covered in ants. They had just come out of everywhere and for this little bit of sweet that I had thought that the glass was empty, but to all of these other creatures, there was so much richness there. And I think that this was really my first experience with like a concept of abundance and a concept of perspective, kind of the different ways we see things and what might actually be there. And so thinking about place, those kind of things started popping into my mind and making me wonder about our memory and the way it sort of shapes us. And so we created this piece. I'm not sure. I'm actually not looking at time at all, and I can be a talker. So I'll tell you.
Great. We're doing great on time.
Okay, good. So I'll tell you a little bit about the actual making of it, because that was hilarious. I just decided I wanted to make a puppet show, a shadow puppet show, because I think that's sort of how memory is. We have these experiences and they might linger and be so strong for us, but as we filter them through our minds, they change and they sort of become like shadows or something, where it's like, it's so real and yet not quite. Like, I think I can actually summon the taste of that chocolate milk, but I'm sure it's not quite the same. And so I knew I wanted to make a shadow puppet, and I knew I also wanted to directly reference where I was. And so this was done in the wayang puppetry style from Indonesia. And the look of those puppets and the way that the set is, where it's just like a solid set and then the puppets are really telling the entire story, that's that style, the wayang style. And it's incredible. If you can look it up online and watch it, and it's just absolutely amazing. I am definitely an amateur puppet artist, but I knew I wanted to make that, and I started working on it by just cutting out the shapes that would create the backdrop and the setting for it out of paper. And the puppets themselves are actually created out of a paper pulp. So while you're watching it, you can kind of see that there's like different layers of shadows, but much of those are actually created by more or less two-dimensional shapes that are sort of just at different spaces in relation to that front screen. And we worked with many different things for the front screen. First, I had a sheet, then I had some like tracing paper, and then I got some vellum, and vellum was lovely and clean. And the puppets themselves, though, have like a three-dimensionality to it. And so that really kind of allows the times when they turn or when they come forward, like when she's drinking the milk or different things. It kind of gives it a dimensionality in the shadows that adds a little bit more texture to what's a pretty simple story. And we started making this. I had never made a puppet show before, and not really a video like this. The video work I'd done in the past was more like direct filming, not like creating a set. And I decided it would be a great idea to build the set under my kitchen table. So we built the whole thing under the kitchen table and ended up having to sit under the table with these puppets with like bent over, hunched over, like doing this puppet show. And so we'd get these like horrible neck aches and like meanwhile trying to tell the story and work with the sound that was created by my partner, Devin Frank, who I told the story to multiple times. And then he watched me starting to make the set and the puppets, and he began making the music. And then once he had the music going, I was able to kind of direct the film and start choreographing essentially so that the two would come together in this way where it is one.
Great. So with the traditional puppetry, do they normally speak, or is it normally just kind of evolved with music the way yours did?
With music, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that was one question I had, because I was like, oh, do they normally talk, or how does it work? So that's very interesting, to kind of curate your own music, because some of it sounded more traditional and then some of it sounded very contemporary. So it's kind of a nice mixture of both of those things.
It's definitely like a traditional kind of inspired by Indonesian gamelan, that run through the filter of rock and roll. So it's kind of like memory again, the way we kind of bring all our life into the way we tell a story. And yeah,
gamelan is so very identifiable. Like once you're familiar with it, it's not something that you could mistake for something else. So it's a nice blending. I enjoyed hearing that part. So your partner did a great job with that. So I was also curious with your work about, I guess kind of building up that tension. You're both filmmakers, so Keenan can answer this too. But, the idea with your work, Crystal, you were kind of building this tension. So, even the relationship between the older woman and the younger woman, and, how you identified them, the older woman seemed almost like an old hag, like kind of what you would think of. Not, I don't mean it in a bad way, but I don't know how else you could take it. But, she kind of had this like older kind of bony quality and a big nose. And so it was kind of humorous, but it was very loving at the same time. And so it was funny to see the two of them juxtaposed, kind of age and youth. And then also, how they were kind of going back and forth together. Like at the end, it almost seemed like they were kind of arguing, and then also with the tension with the aunt, and, how did you kind of come up with that idea of playing with scale, where all of a sudden it's just one ant and it's huge, rather than, a bunch of little tiny ants? I mean, I thought that was a very unique way of approaching your storyline.
Yeah, so we called him the King Ant because he was so cool. And I think that, Keenan actually spoke to this really well earlier, this idea that you start a piece of art and you can aim for it to be this like direct story, but then there's something lost in that. And I think what happened a lot with the ants was, as I started learning the materials that I was working with, I mean, it certainly got messy too. Like there are ant pieces falling over and, stuff's going crazy kind of in there. But as I started working with the materials, I sort of started seeing what could actually tell the story and make it compelling and bring us in and sort of allow for the viewer to find his or her story in it. Like, I think that when we make art, I have such a specific story with this piece, but I think that there are so many ways that we can view it and so many places where it just can jump off into our own experiences. And for me, very much it is this idea of like nature taking over and kind of winning, and the relationship between the older woman and the younger woman. What's sort of funny is that as I get older, I used to draw all the time. So I draw all the time. And I used to always draw these like very sexy women. And and as I get older, I find myself loving to draw like these crazy bodies and these like long breasts and huge noses, and maybe it's because my own nose is getting longer and my own breasts are getting lower, or I have no idea, but I love it. And I love the honesty of it. And kind of like, for me, the women are definitely two different people, and the older woman is definitely guiding the younger woman and being like, it was the cup of milk, but in a way, I think they could possibly be the same person. It could be your older you talking to, telling you what's happening, or kind of pointing something out. So yeah, so I think that part of it is also just aesthetic. Part of it is that you start making something and you see the beauty in the materials, and the beauty in the story starts to come out and take on its own life.
Yeah, and that's so exciting. So, and I almost dropped my notepad. And I feel like both of you have that, where it's like your own, story kind of becomes this springboard, and then it goes into all these different directions. So, I think that's really inspiring for our art students and for any of the artists, listening today. So, yeah, terrific. Well, thank you so much, both of you. I really appreciate your time. Yes?
I did see a question.
Oh,
so
did I miss it?
Uh-huh.
Let me see. Here we go. Oh, maybe in the chat?
Yeah, so Anne asked, was your piece made in one cut or edited together? And I thought that was an interesting question, because it was made in one cut. And so that's what I was kind of talking about, which was that, like, where the hands come up and the hair comes through, is I didn't initially want that in there. And so it took a lot of times of going through and watching the different cuts, because there were ones that were perfectly clean. And it took watching it and really deciding, do I want that hand of the maker in this image? And do I want to share that kind of intimacy and rawness again?
Yeah. I think that mark of the maker really is important, especially in the work that you're doing with this kind of, it's almost like a children's storybook, that you're narrating. And so I think it works so well with the story and, with kind of the feeling that you're trying to evoke. So I think it's the perfect amount of craft, I would say, that kind of shows through. And,
thank you.
Yeah, it's really just beautiful work. So. Yeah, let's see. Did anybody else? I didn't see that. So it looks like she said, what are the broader ideas or metaphors that you think are conveyed in this piece? She might have asked that earlier, but you did kind of address that a little bit, but I don't know if you wanted to clarify anything.
I mean, definitely, in short, place, memory, the environment, our relationship with the environment, and kind of that concept of abundance and perspective. So really, that's a big one for me, is the idea of what one might think is empty and could be so full and rich for another, is huge to me in this piece.
Yeah, beautiful. Wonderful. Great. Well, I think if you have any other things, Keenan, you did a terrific job, and so did you, Crystal. So I want to thank both of you for participating, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing more work. I'm going to keep my eye on both of you.